ANC leaders are meeting with convicted liar, ANC Women's League President Bathabile Dlamini.
Now the meeting, including President Cyril Ramaphosa and his deputy David Mabuza, is due to decide Dlamini's fate after the Johannesburg Magistrate's court sentenced her on Friday. She was sent to jail for 4 years or pay a 200,000 rand fine, half of which was suspended.
The ANC's policy requires any member who is facing criminal charges to step aside, while those convicted have to resign. To date, Dlamini has neither stepped down nor resigned after being convicted and sentenced for perjury.
Now, of course, let's find out from the party if at all that decision has been reached on the president of the ANC Women's League. We are joined by Pule Mabe, who is the spokesperson. Pule, thank you so much for your time. Has the meeting wrapped up?
Well, afternoon to your viewers. I'm not a national official of the ANC. I'm not aware of when they're expected to meet. I'm hearing it from you. Once they have met and there are issues that require them to update us in the National Working Committee or in the NEC, they will certainly do so.
So are you saying as the spokesperson of the party that you do not know of this meeting?
Well, even if I did, I don't think that it belongs here, because meetings of officials are not published like that, like meetings of the NEC. When officials meet, they design their own diary, they check on each other's availability, and if the issues that they've discussed require that they brief the NWC, they do so.
I cannot help but ask you again if that meeting is indeed taking place, because this matter is, of course, in the public domain, Pule, and one of the things that we even heard from the president of the ANC Women's League herself when she spoke to my colleague Natasha Piri, for example, she did allude to the fact that the meeting is happening and she will be part of the meeting, and should the meeting ask her to step aside, she'll do so. So I ask in the interest, of course, of what is happening within the ANC, because this is a matter of national interest.
I don't think that we are disputing that such a meeting has to take place. What I'm saying is I'm not aware whether it is taking place today. We have already communicated. When we concluded our NEC, it is there in our statement that there will be that engagement between Comrade Bathabile Dlamini and the national officials. This we have placed on record. What I'm not at liberty to confirm is whether, because in the bulletin you are saying the meeting sits today. So now, if I'm not aware of something and I come and confirm it, I could possibly be lying to your viewers.
Okay. I want us to still stay with that issue, because one of the things that, she spoke to Natasha about last week was around the step-aside, resolution of the ANC. And I'm going to just borrow from what she says and find out your thoughts on that. She says that, she will step aside if she is called to do so by the officials. But she says that if the Constitution was clear on this matter and the resolution of the 54th conference was also clear, there would be no need for anyone to even ask her to step aside. She would do so voluntarily. So is it not then time, because we do know when the NEC took this decision and adopted some of the guidelines that it was a working document, is it not time then to re-look at this working document so that you put it to bed and clarify some of the concerns that other members have?
Well, it is still a working or living document in that way. Out of experiences that we gather, when there are new cases or developments in the party, we will be able to know what is expected of us and what actions we need to be taking. I mean, there are a lot of things that would have happened in the intervening period since we passed that resolution or developed the guidelines on stepping aside. But because the guidelines are themselves a living document, it means that along the way we will be working with the experience we gather to see how best do we enhance or enrich those regulations that are there in the guidelines. So the ANC is not reneging on its own commitment to making sure that it deals with the imagery of the party. It presents itself as an organization that is serious about dealing with a number of issues that really affect its own standing out in society, whether it be corruption, malfeasance, and a number of those.
I'm keen to find out from you, Pule, on this particular issue, because she says that there appears to be a witch hunt where she's concerned, and she says that there are people that have not stepped aside, but she feels like she's being hounded to do so. And she even says that there is no consistency in how the ANC applies this particular rule. And she really appears to be somebody who feels like she's being hard done. What is, your view as the ANC on this particular one?
Well, the meeting that you spoke about when we started this conversation, her own engagement with the national officials, that meeting will specifically create an environment or create a platform for Mambata to also ventilate her own concerns. I think in the ANC we create sufficient platforms. Everyone in the African National Congress who is impacted upon by resolutions or decisions of conferences as part of, by way of process, you always make sure that you take them along so that there could be an overall understanding of what is being done or steps that the organization has to undertake. You see, the National Executive Committee has got a very difficult duty, and this duty is to make sure that it upholds and implements resolutions of conferences. So, and the implementation, the execution of resolutions sometimes or at all times requires an overall understanding of all the members of the African National Congress, because we as the National Executive Committee do not arrive in the NEC and start developing our own resolutions. It will be wrong of us to do so. We are guided by the wishes of conference. If conference says, this is how we want you to implement certain things, we do that. And then we develop guidelines to then guide how we shall have implemented those. But if along the way, in the execution or implementation of our guidelines, there are certain lessons that we pick up, we will then come back and enrich the work we are doing. And when we report back to conference, we'll give them that feedback.
Pule, I'm going to ask you just to pause for a second for us. Now, we do have breaking news coming out of Mpumalanga, and we just need to speak to Samgele Maseko quickly, and then I'll come back to this conversation. And I do understand that we do have SABC political reporter Samgele Maseko on the line. Samgele, one of the things that the president said in his closing address yesterday in Mpumalanga is that the leadership that has now been elected in the province needs to reflect on the election of Mandla Msibi. Of course, we know the difficulties and the charges that have been brought before the courts around him, but we do understand now that there's developments there.
Yes, indeed, Bongiwe, the ANC's top brass did meet earlier on this morning and were deliberating on this issue of the election of Mandla Msibi as the provincial treasurer of the ANC in Mpumalanga, knowing very well that he's been charged with a serious case of murder. A letter has been sent to Mandla Msibi and the provincial secretary of the ANC in Mpumalanga, Muzi Chirwa, in them saying that through a letter sent from the SGO office with the signature of Paul Mashatile, the Treasurer General, who signs off all documents from the SGO, that Mandla Msibi must, in line with the ANC step-aside resolution, send a letter that indeed he has voluntarily stepped aside as the provincial treasurer of the ANC in Mpumalanga. You'd remember when Dr. Gwendra Mahupa was speaking after the announcement of the officials of Mpumalanga, she took to the podium and Mandla Msibi explained extensively the ANC step-aside guidelines and the ones that were narrowed down by the National Executive Committee in March last year about those whom are charged with serious crimes, those whom are charged with allegations of murder. They have to step aside voluntarily or be summarily suspended by the organization. Paul Mashatile, the Treasurer General, after a meeting with the officials today, they have decided to send a letter to Mandla Msibi to officially confirm in a written statement to the ANC's headquarters that he has voluntarily stepped aside. If he has not, then a suspension and disciplinary proceedings would then ensue, like they did with the now suspended Secretary General of the African National Congress. So in essence, just as true to the words of ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa yesterday to the delegates of the provincial conference that they must reflect on this issue of electing someone who's charged with murder, saying that this is not a unique scenario to Mpumalanga alone. It's also facing a number of provinces where you've got a number of people who are charged with serious crimes who are availing themselves for positions within the governing party. In the Eastern Cape, you've got Terence Ntutu, who's going for the position of provincial secretary, who's charged. You've got Daniel Hiza in Limpopo, who's charged with allegations of fraud, corruption relating to the great VBS bank heights. He's also contesting and he's charged. In eThekwini, you've got Zandile Kumete, who has stepped aside to the allegations of fraud and corruption on that waste tender. So in essence, the ANC wants them to step aside, but you've got the ANC spokesperson there to provide more clarity.
Before I speak to Pule again, Samgela, I'm going to come back to you very briefly. What does this then mean for the Treasurer General position in that particular province? Have they indicated who's coming on before I pose that to Pule? They cannot
put anyone in Mandla Msibi's position. If Mandla Msibi voluntarily steps aside, that position is vacant, and there can be no one until they go to a provincial general council. He would have also not resigned. So the position would still belong to Mandla Msibi for the entire term of office until he is convicted. If he is convicted, then he would have to resign. If he is cleared, then he goes back to his position and resumes the function of a provincial treasurer. So the position remains Mandla Msibi's until there is a conviction. Then he will have to resign. If there is no conviction and he is found not guilty, he then goes back to that position. ANC Constitution clearly stipulates.
All right. Thank you so much for that. That is SABC political reporter Samgela Maseko Pule. I had to interrupt you there for, to go to that breaking news story. So let's talk about what happens now, because this is a very critical position of Treasurer General. You've got to mobilize, some funding for the party, and it's a critical position. But obviously it's going to be vacant until there's developments around him. What happens now?
Oh, okay. No, just for clarity, we only have one Treasurer General in the ANC. It's important even for your own viewers, because I've heard people refer to provincial treasurers as treasurer generals. So we need to clarify it. So for the record, people understand there's only one treasurer general, and that's the treasurer general at the national level. The other subsequent positions would be provincial treasurers. So I can confirm that indeed the letter has been written to Comrade Mandla, the provincial treasurer of Mpumalanga, by the Treasurer General on behalf of the SGO, because he now does that while our DSG is getting better every day, and we continue to wish her well. Comrade Mandla has agreed. He has previously written to the African National Congress voluntarily citing that he will be stepping aside. Even in this instance, when I had a conversation with the TG confirmed earlier that Comrade Mandla had agreed to, he had made the life of the organization much easier. He had agreed to remain on that suspension that arose out of him stepping aside at the time when he had said that he will be stepping aside. So he won't be assuming, he won't be going to office or assuming the position in that way up until he is done with his case. But of course, the guidelines do provide in the intervening period for some form of review and all of that. So yeah, so we are quite comfortable that he has acceded to the request of the African National Congress.
So Pule, in the meantime, what happens to the provincial treasurer's position? Because one would then say, who then occupies it? How does the...
Well, I think what we would do is that we will leave that to the Provincial Executive Committee. They have got full powers accorded to them by the Constitution of the African National Congress. If one of their, unlike with the position of secretary, it's easier. Where the secretary is not available, the deputy secretary will perform such a responsibility. So they will have to take a decision on what they do. I mean, if they want the deputy secretary in the intervening period to occupy or fulfill those responsibilities, it will be a decision that officials take, for as long as they take someone from amongst themselves as provincial officials. But our structures of the ANC are quite capable to deal with those issues. So what we have done was to make sure that immediately when such an instance arises, and now it goes back to the issue we're talking about, with these guidelines being this living document, what you refer to as a working document, being that living document, means that out of every experience, let's take this, use it as an experience. So we've now gathered experience, and we say, if we do not pronounce ourselves clearly, if we come across as being, if people believe we are vague on this issue, what it will do is that there will be a precedent set. And you see, precedence has got a way of becoming a rule or a law in the organization if you do not nip it in the bud much earlier. We've got a national working committee that is sitting next week. Our officials have responded in the manner that they've done on the Mandla Msibi situation, and we must commend him. He has accepted that kind of counsel. He spoke to the Treasurer General and agreed that he will remain in that suspension arising out of him having returned to the organization, that he will be stepping aside so that he gives the case his full attention. Comrade Gwen Ramokhupa is the convener of the province of Mpumalanga. Took the time, just after we announced the results of officials, took the time to address plenary on what this means, and further said that it is important that we, as the apex structure of the ANC, reflect on this when we meet again. Comrade Natim Tetwa, who's also a deployee of the Mpumalanga province, did exactly the same when he had to address conference and then remind them of the commitment we made when we left that the seminal occasion of the 54th National Conference.
So, Pule, when does this, wrap up? Because it's important that the ANC really provides this kind of clarity, because we're seeing it, as Samgele even said, in Limpopo. We're seeing it in other provinces. There appears to be this vagueness is really now something that some of your own members are crying about, to saying that it's not clear, and
Correct.
It may provide some kind of loophole for others, while others, it raises concerns that you as an organization are not being consistent.
Well, I can tell you now that we are very consistent as the movement. Well, experience is the best teacher. We are learning and drawing experience as we forge ahead with the implementation of this resolution. It has not been an easy one. It's for the first time. We rose out of the 54th National Conference having resolved on the restoration of the credibility and integrity of the African National Congress. And we said, what are the things that we ought to be doing to make sure that we restore the credibility and integrity of the movement? Part of what we said we will do is that when cadres are charged with serious crimes or inducted to appear in a court of law for such comrades would be asked to step aside. Then we then went further and said, if we leave it open-ended like that, it can create a challenge. We further said we need to develop guidelines. So we then established that kind of a process that was led by our Treasurer General. That came back. Even as they came back, we still agreed that because we have never implemented this before, we ought to treat this document as a living document, so that with the experiences we pick up along the way in the course of its execution, we could be able to then come back and say, what are the areas that require some reinforcement or enhancement, so that in its execution in totality, we have at least clarified all of the things. Let me give you a simple example. The constitution of the ANC defines who is a member. It also defines what you can and cannot do as a member. Now, part of what you can do as it deals with the elective part of a member can nominate and be nominated. Now, during the time when you were doing the constitution of the ANC, you did not envisage that you would along the way have developed guidelines that have got to do with certain issues around the conduct of your cadres, where they would have been charged and all of that. Now, you've got to make sure that when you go to the policy conference and ultimately the 55th National Conference, you begin synchronizing all of these things, meaning that what you say in your guidelines and what you say in your own supreme law, which is the Constitution of the African National Congress, could at least be in sync. Samgelo addresses it well. He says that he doesn't resign. So, for instance, take the case of our own Secretary General. While he has stepped aside with that temporary suspension, he is still the Secretary General of the ANC. Is just that because of that temporary suspension, he cannot execute those responsibilities while he has stepped aside. So that is the one issue that the organization, while we grapple with this thing, we ought to be saying, at what point do we define an end? Because I think that's what yourselves in the media and many others in society are looking for.
Pule, before we wrap up, very briefly, because we need to go for a break, but one of the things that really is quite serious here, perjury is a very serious crime. It's something that cannot be taken lightly, and even the judgment in itself against the ANC Women's League president was such, it was scathing, and it's something that others have even said that there should not even be a question about a meeting with officials. She should be stepping aside, given the seriousness of the conviction and the image of the ANC that continues to suffer when there are such rulings. What do you say then to those that are saying this meeting is not even necessary? The ANC should have even been clear from the word go that she needs to step aside immediately.
Well, the ANC is an organization of process. You see, the ANC has got its own internal processes. So decisions of the ANC are not taken through whistling. Don't stand on the street whistling there and say, oh, that whistle is now a decision. Don't work like that. We're a self-respecting organization. We've got rules in the movement. We've got processes in the organization. If the ANC did not have processes, then, I mean, you yourselves in the media would simply run affairs of the ANC through WhatsApp messages. We don't work like that. We've got processes in the ANC. Part of the process that we have agreed to undertake as the National Executive Committee, the apex structure of the ANC, was that this matter must be dealt with by our national officials. We've got full faith that when they deal with it, they will locate whatever view they arrive at well within our own policy parameters. Because you see, if you want to consolidate the unity and renewal process of the ANC, you need to make every member, including those that are facing situation, feel that they are still members of the African National Congress and that the manner in which they are being treated does not infringe on their own rights as well. So we've got to walk that path with everyone. That's unfortunately how the ANC operates. So the ANC doesn't take decisions because there's this big screams outside. The people are screaming at the ANC. No, we don't have to. We don't need people to shout at us for us to make the right decisions. We know what ought to be done, and we must have faith that the officials of the ANC are capable enough to take these things further forward. Okay,
Pule, thank you so much for that. Unfortunately, we have to leave it there because we have to go for a quick ad break. But that was National Spokesperson of the ANC, Pule Mabe, talking to us even about the developments that are just in from Mpumalanga. On the other side of this, Francis will also bring you a conversation that looks at the Northwest and the state of governance there.